What I'm actually titling this is ESG being politicized, which may on the face of it sound like a pretty odd question. It's odd because we've been seeing headlines like this for several years now. Dan Patrick declares war on Green Wall Street investors. The Republican Party directs culture war fury towards green investing trend. Kentucky warns JP Morgan, BlackRock Vanguard splash on lobbyists as ESG battles rage ahead of the US election. And my favorite, ESG is coming for your candy bars, right? So in one sense, it certainly looks like ESG is being politicized. Right? When we say that ESG is being politicized in this sense, we're saying something like this. Here is a perfectly good tool for improving investment analysis, one that could help improve risk-adjusted returns, one that also attracts values investors. Why is this becoming controversial? Why are politicians now talking about this? They're turning ESG into something it isn't, right? Now, if this is all that we mean by politicization, then yes, I agree that ESG is being politicized. Integrating ESG factors into investment has become really complicated in the US because of politicization. And there are early but very clear signs. David referenced the rising populism. There are clear signs that ESG investing is going to get a lot more complicated here in Europe too. And that is why it's so important to characterize correctly exactly what it is that's going on here. Now, what I will argue today is that in a deeper sense, ESG is not being politicized. I will argue that, on the contrary, it is entirely normal that politicians and other stakeholders should be talking about ESG investing in a political way. And that is because, in an important sense, ESG is political. It simply is, right? It always has been political. ESG is political because it involves the use of power. Sorry. All right. Now, to make my argument, I will need to draw upon some political philosophy, specifically the philosophy about political power. And I will then talk through the concrete implications of my view for your choices as asset managers. So let's begin with the political philosophy. Can political philosophy shed some light on the challenges you're now being faced with as asset managers pursuing ESG? Well, it depends on what you think political philosophy is all about. I'm going to take you through two competing views. The first view, the traditional view, goes roughly like this. So here is a political community. It may not look like a political community. If you look closer, you'll simply see people sitting together, picnicking. Being members of a community means we share something significant in common. If the community is a nation, we share a piece of territory, a history, institutions, perhaps a language. And these are things that form part of our identity. Now, for all that we share, we're also very different. We're also very different from one another. We value different things. We have different interests, and that's just the way it is. It's inescapable. Now, look at these people again. They appear to be congregating for some kind of common purpose. They've made space for each other, and they're respecting that space. What makes a community not just a community, but a political community, is that we are living together. We are trying to accomplish things together. So now, because we're trying to do stuff together, our differences become really significant. Given our differences and the potential that therefore exists for conflict, how do we accomplish the task of living together? If only there were someone we could call upon to bring about order and create the conditions for cooperation. Cooperation despite our differences. Someone with real superpowers. Someone like the state. The state has a superpower. The state has a monopoly over the force that can be used within the state's territory. This monopoly of force means that the state can introduce and enforce laws and directives designed to bring about cooperation in the pursuit of society's goals. Great. But the state has to do this in a way that is acceptable. Right? It cannot simply dominate. Domination is not politics. A political solution to the need for cooperation is one that meets some basic standards of legitimacy. Standards like having a representative, just institutions governing us. Now, when the state solves the problem of cooperation in a way that is in fact legitimate, then we say that it has political authority. Having political authority is what entitles the state to use its power over others. So far, so good. But now that the state has to actually do stuff, and while it's got the authority of the people, it has to maintain that authority by acting in ways that are legitimate. Roughly speaking, this means bringing about just outcomes in a just way. Now, if we look at politics through this view of political philosophy, the link to asset management is simply this. The state is entitled to issue laws, regulations, decrees to bring about order, and the conditions for cooperation, the rules of the game. And subjects obey the laws, and you, asset managers, you are subjects. So you're fine if you just follow the rules of the game, and if you want to have more freedom of action, you simply lobby for it. Let's give this first view of political philosophy a name. Let's call it the state-centric view of political philosophy. Because it assumes the problems we're trying to solve are those to do with states, and what it has to say has been formulated with states in mind. Now, if we're not talking about the state, then on this view, we're simply not talking about politics at all, right? It's all about the state. Now, I want to talk about a second view of political philosophy, one that I want to argue for. Let's begin by going back to the state. So the relationship between the political community and the state, and the need for authority and sustaining legitimacy on the view that I will argue for, all this remains true. It still plays a central role. But let's focus on the state for a moment. The political community's significance here is that it licenses the state to do something for it. Strip away the political community and you're left with simply an entity that has power. Sure, the state has a very particular superpower, but it's just a power holder. And this is where this view goes in a different direction. If the reason political philosophy is interested in the state is that it holds power, let's just talk about power. The license for using power and its legitimation, and say that the state is merely an important example of a power holder and the demands that are placed on it. The fact is, there are other power holders. And these too need some kind of authority to use their power over others. I think you can see where this is going to go. And that authority needs to be sustained by using power legitimately. Let's give this second view of political philosophy a name. Let's call it the power-centric view of political philosophy. It has all the same substance as the state-centric view, but without the stately packaging, right? Well, great. What has this got to do with ESG? Well, first we need to put you back in the picture in this second view. Here's you. This is a still from the Warner Brothers film, Justice League. Batman here as Bruce Wayne has just recruited this boy, the Flash, to the Justice League. The Flash is screwing up his face, and he's turning and he's asking Bruce Wayne, so what exactly is your superpower? And Bruce Wayne looks at the Flash and he replies, I'm an asset manager and I have $11.58 trillion of assets under management. Actually, that's not quite what he says. He says, I'm rich. This is where you fit into political philosophy on this second view. So asset managers and asset owners have power, power that affects other people. Your decisions impose outcomes on others. You make trade-offs between different people's interests. You simply cannot do asset management without using your power and having these impacts. It's impossible. Friedman was wrong. Now, being rich doesn't give you the right to use your power in ways that have these impacts on other people. And you don't have the superpower that the state has, the monopoly of force within the territory, to help justify your power. Instead, your political authority is derived from the state. The state where you're domiciled, the states where you're operating. The state licenses you to use your power for the purposes that business exists for. You now have political authority to use your power, but you still have to sustain your legitimacy for it. Broadly speaking, this means you've got to bring about just outcomes in a just way. This is what I mean when I say that ESG is political. But so what? What does that mean for you as asset managers? I like to talk about the big bucks choices, the big high-level choices that business leaders have given certain realities. In other words, making these choices is why you get paid the big bucks. Okay? As asset managers, I think you have three options. The first two options essentially boil down to trying to avoid politics altogether. Right? So the first option is that you choose to dominate. You choose not to make your power political. You simply force everyone to just accept what you do. But force is not your superpower. Instead, domination like this could be through manipulation, through the manufacturing of consent. And then there's silence. Well, examples of silence. Bankers bury ESG in pitch books to head off Republican attacks. Canadian investors stand by ESG despite green hushing trend. JP Morgan changes DEI to DOI. Okay. While silence like green hushing looks like a display of submission or weakness, it can also constitute domination. By going silent on ESG, assuming you're successful in doing so, you keep on using your power the way you want to, but you take away the opportunity to have it contested. But if this is going to work, you have to dominate successfully. And I don't know how feasible it is to pursue domination for a long time. And in general, I think it is clear from recent headlines that domination is not succeeding as a strategy. Some recent examples, holding managers accountable. I'll skip through these because I know time's against me. Top UK pension fund pulls 28 billion from State Street over ESG retreat. New York pension funds put asset managers on notice over climate plans. Okay, so what's the next option? You can cede or share power. Now, this is a strategy that various fund managers have launched. There are two options I see in evidence. This first one is about voting choice, right? So all the big three index tracking firms and at least one European asset management firm have launched services to give their clients the opportunity to determine which way they want their votes to be cast, right? This is the fund manager giving up power. This other example is more recent. This is BlackRock devising a very explicit policy on voting on climate change resolutions, and it's going to offer its clients the chance to adopt that policy as part of the fund management mandate, right? Such that even if BlackRock is voting on some other kind of basis across its portfolios more generally, for these mandates, it will vote in accordance with this particular climate change position. That also is a case of giving up power and specifically dragging asset owners into this political arena. Now, these are interesting moves, and I haven't seen too much pushback yet from the right on these.
I'm going to have to ask you to speak because we have 3 more speakers.
Yeah, okay. The last option then is to legitimate the power that you retain. And, you know, it used to be the case that investment returns are the only legitimation story that an asset manager ever needs. This is no longer the case. Witness the Business Roundtable statement on the purpose of the corporation. All stakeholders matter now. You've got stakeholder capitalism eating into this idea from the left. You've got MAGA capitalism eating into this idea on the right. This legitimation story is going to be a difficult one. Comes back to the usual things: transparency, accountability, inclusivity, human rights, justice, and sustainability. You've been doing this before. Equator Principles 2003 was a legitimation measure. So was the UNPRI in 2005. Right? Now I'm finishing. All right. Okay. The reason, on this view I've just set out, on this particular political philosophy view I just set out, the reason ESG is political is because investment is political. And this puts asset managers in a tight spot. This is the concluding thought. Firstly, because you have power, no matter what you do, it is going to be political. If you do ESG, that has political implications. If you choose to step back from ESG, that has political implications. If you go silent, that too has political implications. And secondly, whatever you decide to do, you're going to alienate someone. Whoever you choose to include in your considerations, you will necessarily exclude others. And because this is all about power, if you concede to demands to step back, you're going to look weak, and they will come back for more concessions. So you really are between a rock and a hard place. I thought this headline captures it very well. If you're interested in continuing thinking about business through this particular lens, then this is a Substack that I've set up which will focus on that entirely. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.